Hello and welcome to Unacademy, the one-stop solution for an English medium civil services aspirant. Today we take our journey of our past forward. This is a special series in which we are discussing the current affairs aspects of history in the news itself. And yesterday we talked about the Ayodhya Ram Temple and its architecture. Today we'll talk about a very interesting nomination by India into the UNESCO Tangible Heritage List, and we'll discuss this concept of tangibility and intangibility. Before we do that, I hope that you are liking these sessions. It is constructively contributing to your preparation generally. And before we go into the context, let me give you a basic overview here. There are three basic aspects here. The first one talks about what is this UNESCO Tangible Heritage List. This is the first thing which you should know. The second aspect here is related to the concept of the current affairs, and the third would be the latest edition before this nomination, because this remains relevant for 2024 and 2025. Now, when we talk about the first aspect, which is UNESCO Tangible Heritage, there are two words that automatically pop up in that regard, which is, what do you mean by intangible, which you would have heard recently also, and what is this concept of tangible. So when we talk about intangible, intangible is something which cannot be touched, which is a skill, which is a festival, it is a culture, it is a cultural expression which is basically expressed through people. Though intangible is expressed in tangibility, but the core form of it, like the words which are coming out of my mouth, are intangible. On the other hand, UNESCO has its intangible heritage list also. On the other hand, when we talk about tangible, tangibility is about something which I can touch, this remote, this pen, tangibility. Tangible is divided into three according to UNESCO. One is called mixed, cultural, and natural. India has different tangible heritages under all of these three lists. We are talking about the culture list under UNESCO. I will discuss the other terminologies related to UNESCO tangible heritage when I will talk about the context in which we are discussing this lecture. The second aspect here is current affairs. Why are we discussing it? Because there has been a very important nomination and it is related to history very closely, therefore it becomes important. The latest addition to this was something which I referred to you yesterday also, are two things. One is the Hoysaleshwara temple or the sacred assemblage in Belur and Helibed, and the second is Shantiniketan. These two have been recently inscribed into the UNESCO Tangible Heritage List under cultural category. That is why it becomes important. So what I've done till this point with you is I've revised the concept of intangibility and tangibility, and second, I've also discussed what was the latest edition. This is a nomination, therefore let's see, does it get inscribed into the representative list or not. Now that brings to us the second aspect here, which is what is the context and what is the point of this discussion. See, the Maratha Military Landscapes of India have been recently nominated by India to the UNESCO World Heritage List, which is basically called the UNESCO Tangible Heritage List. Now, they were already in the tentative list since 2021, and they have been nominated because of their diverse geographical and physiographic regions which they represent and are strategically located in. Now, this in turn brings to us two issues. So I'm basically breaking it down for you in a way that you can understand it properly. Now, if you look at it, there are two words. I've already told you what does World Heritage List mean, which is this tangible concept. Now there's a word called tentative here. Now what would tentative mean? See, under UNESCO, if you have to get something in this list, which is the World Heritage List or the Tangible Heritage List, you have to first nominate it into the tentative list, what UNESCO basically calls inventory. So UNESCO will not choose anything which is not nominated by the state or that country into the tentative list. It is out of this tentative list that you get to the representative list. And that is why you would see that in most of the newspapers, it will say that this heritage has been added to the representative list of the UNESCO World Heritage or representative list of the tangible heritage list. Now, the concept is very simple. It's a three-step concept. First, create an inventory. What do you want to nominate? Then it goes into the tentative list of the UNESCO. Out of this tentative list, UNESCO can choose if you nominate it for representative list. To make it more precise, see, first step, a country must make sure that it makes an inventory of its important natural and cultural heritages located within its boundary. Then this inventory is called tentative list. This inventory will be valid for 5 to 10 years, out of which UNESCO will nominate it for the representative list. You say that I want to send it for the representative list. The World Heritage Committee, please note this, the World Heritage Committee cannot consider a nomination for the concept of adding it to the representative list if it is already not in the tentative list. To be more precise, to make it more simple, see, India, what it does is, it creates a tentative list, what UNESCO will call an inventory. This inventory is sent to UNESCO. When it is sent to UNESCO, UNESCO says, okay, you have 50 sites which have been, for example, which have been put into tentative list. Now UNESCO will ask that for the year 2024-25, out of this tentative list, which do you nominate to go forward into the representative list? So, if you look at it, what did the current affairs context say? It said that the Maratha military complexes or landscape were already in the tentative list since 2021. So, since 2021, they were under consideration. Thereafter, they have now been nominated by India to be inscribed into the representative list. So, this is basically the process. You have to create an inventory that becomes the tentative list. That tentative list will be considered by the World Heritage Committee to go forward in that regard. So, first create an inventory, send it to the UNESCO, then tell UNESCO which one you want to nominate for that year. This is the process. This is the static portion. You should understand this. It's very easy, but it should be understood by you very well, because there are terms which are coming through here: tentative, tangible and intangible. So they should be in your mind properly. So I hope that the first part of this discussion is clear, which basically deals with the concept of tangibility, intangibility, what do I mean by tentative, and thereafter what do I mean by representative, and how does this whole process work in that regard. I hope you understand all of this right now. Now with this, let's move towards the current affairs aspect, why we are here for. So when we talk about the concept of Marathas, we have to talk about the most important statesman of India, the most towering figure in modern India itself, early modern and modern India, which is Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. And Maratha military landscape, most of it is very closely related to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, and therefore let's try to understand why is that the military landscape is important and why have these forts become important. Now, in order to understand that, you need to understand what was his conception of power and how he operated. Because after Ashoka, after the Mauryas, we have seen only decentralization of power, decentralization tendencies in India. It is only Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj who created a pure centralized system when he was creating the Maratha Empire. Before that, be it Ikta, be it Mansabdari, be it Nayankara, be it the Satvahana polity, be it Guptas, they all have decentralizing tendencies or decentralization generally. The concept of centralization was gone with the Mauryas, and it is only coming back with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So it is very, very important that we understand this point generally. Now, The first pillar for Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj when it came to power was separation of power. He believed that if there is an executive power, if there's a legislative power, and if there's a judicial power, they should never be with the same officer. They should always be divided, because what he believed was that if they come together, that is the seed of corruption being sown. This is the first point. He also made sure that with separation of power, there was check and balances. And if you know the concept of Ashtapradhan, you know that none of the 8 officers which helped the Chhatrapati were answerable to each other. They were always answerable to the Chhatrapati. There was a direct link between them. So they were never collectively responsible to anybody, individually responsible to Chhatrapati. And therefore, he made sure that there were multiple checks and balances. All of them were non-permanent. All of them were non-hereditary. All of them could be transferred. They were removed from time to time. These are things which made sure that there was no decentralizing tendency. Therefore, fragmentation would not be possible. But when it came to his administration, be it at the Mauza level, be it at the Taraf level, he believed that the empire nodes means power centers, should be forts. Basically, he constructed so many forts, close to 350 to 500 if we count the whole period of the Marathas. 350 to 500 forts were created, and these forts were intricately connected in a way that every district level, every sector of the Maratha Empire was connected very well. And therefore, if we add these 3, you get a centralized empire, and therefore these forts are now under the scanner of the UNESCO. These forts are now under current affairs, wherein they have been nominated to become the next tangible heritage of India in that regard. But separation of power from Ashtapradhan to checks and balances, to forts being the node of the empire within which the empire is connected through forts itself, this becomes the basis of centralization. So I hope that you again now understand that these forts are not accidental. They are strategically placed. They were strategically placed in certain areas, and that is why they are there. And that is what the government of India has also recognized, which is the physiographic and geographical location of these different forts in that sense. So I've done 2 things with you. Again, I'm revising with you. First is the concept of tangibility, intangibility, the tentative and representative concept. Second, I've told you what is this basic concept of forts and why were they so important within the Maratha Empire. With this, let's talk about the Maratha Military Landscape, which has been nominated. These are the forts, 12 in total, which have been nominated from the tentative list to the representative list by India to the World Heritage Committee. You have the Salher Fort, then Shivneri Fort, Lohagarh, Chanderi, you have Raigad, Rajgarh, Pratapgarh, you have Suvarnadurg, you have Palna Fort, Vijay-Durg, Sindhu-Durg and Gingi Fort. Out of all of them, except for Gingi, which is in Tamil Nadu, all other are in the Maharashtra sector, and more than that, based on the Sahyadri Hill complex in that sense. So except for Gingi, all of them are in Maharashtra. Now, what we'll do is, we'll further go into their uniqueness. Then I will have a discussion with each one of these forts so that you have a certain visual memory. What I'll try to do is, I'll show you these forts so that you understand them well. There's a certain visual memory in your mind. Over and above that, I'll give you certain basic details about them. You don't have to go into too much detail into each one of them because they have been nominated as a group. But I find it very interesting and useful to have a certain idea about Salher, Shivneri, what is the importance generally. Now, this list should be known to you. 12 in total. You can create an acronym for it. But remember, the odd one out is Gingi, which is Tamil Nadu. Every other fort is in Maharashtra. Now, when it comes to their conservation or which authority they come under, out of these 4, which is Salher, Rajgarh, Kandheri and Pratapgarh, all of them come under the Archaeological Survey of India conservation effort and conservation purview. So they are maintained by and kept in their proper shape by the ASI. However, these 4 forts are under the government of Maharashtra Directorate of Archaeology and Museums. Basically, this is under central authority, this is under state authority, based on their importance, based on their location, and generally based on the level of conservation needed. Maybe if you need a proper expertise, it will go under ASI, and if it can be managed by the state, it will be left with the government of Maharashtra. This is the first place out of which you can get a question, because we are talking here about prelims orientation. So first would have been the odd one out, which is a very obvious one, which is Gingi. And second, or the first major differentiation would be which comes under ASI, which comes under the concept of government of Maharashtra. Then if we move one step further, we can also look at their physiography or geography, on which basically this whole categorization has been done. So if you look at it, you have the Salhar Fort, the Shivneri Fort, Lohagarh, Raigad, Rajgarh and Gingi, which are hill forts. These are hill forts basically based on hills. On the other hand, Pratapgarh is a hill forest fort. Basically, there's a forest complex in which there's a small hill on which the Pratapgarh fort has been made. The second one is called the Panhala Hill Plateau Fort, which is Panhala basically is a plateau complex in which there's a small hill complex on which Panhala was made. Vijayadurg is a coastal fort, which means that it has been made on the coast and overlooks the Arabian Sea. And Kandheri, Suvarnadurg, Sindhudurg are island forts, which is quite interesting. Basically, these are islands of the coast of Maharashtra and the Konkan sector, and these islands have been fortified to basically make them a fort itself. The best way and the most unique way in which the Marathas used to control the Arabian Sea itself. They made sure they had a very strong navy, and the naval presence of the Marathas is because of these different coastal forts, and over and above that, the island forts, which is specifically Khanderi, Suvarnadurg, Sindhudurg, three very, very important ones. So this is the second way in which UPSC can ask you a question for prelims in the way of their basic physiography or geography. So we have first, which is odd one out, all in Maharashtra, this one in Tamil Nadu. Second is ASI and center and state concept. Then it would be Salgarh, Shivneri, you have Lohagarh, Raigad, Rajgarh, Gingi in hill forts. Then Pratapgarh is a hill forest, which is a forest complex along with a hill. Then you have Panhala, which is hill plateau fort, which is a plateau complex in which you have a small or higher area, which would be a hill plateau. And Vijayadurg, I'll show you the images also, is on the coast itself. And these are basically islands, Konkan islands, which have been converted into forts. So I hope, again, this is the third component which I'm telling you, which is the concept of how you can divide it according to the physiography. So that is the division according to who takes care of it, the division on the basis of what is their unique location, and there's also the division on their basic location in that regard. I'm trying to emphasize this point to you because it should come to your mind in that same way, that you realize what are the potential questions which can be made. Now that we understand what is their physiography, we'll go into each one of them. Here I'm trying to, you don't have to, but here I'm trying to give you a visual memory. In art and culture, specifically, if you have a visual reference, it's mostly good because it allows you to have a certain understanding, and maybe that will also create a little bit of interest for the subject. So let's start with Lohagarh. Now, if you look at Lohagarh, it is a very beautifully made and strategically made fort in that regard, and it comes under the concept of a hill fort, and you can see on the top of that hill, they have made or fortified on both sides by making it a very impregnable part, or a concept in which if you're coming from the north or the south or the east or the west, there's only one point. Now, if you can understand how these forts are made, let's talk about a little bit of its basic history. When we talk about Lohagarh, Lohagarh is not a new fort but a fort which was related to, but this hill at least was related to the Rashtrakutas, to the Yadavas, to the Bahmanis, to the Mughals also. And it was in 1648 that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj captured it. But remember one thing, when he captured it, it was just a hill complex. These forts were built in the way they are by the Marathas. Though it will say captured, but the concept is these forts, the small fortifications, simple basic installments were there. But what they are today, the way they have been made, is because of the way how Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj thought about it and made it. In the same way, let's go to Suvarnadurg. Now, Suvarnadurg fort is a very beautiful example of an island fort. You can see here what the Marathas have done, specifically Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. He has taken a small Konkan island which would generally be of no use generally, but he has fortified it to make it into a fortified island. So it basically becomes forts on the sea. And that is why they are known for their naval power. And this fort has a specific reference to the naval commander of the Marathas also. This was under Adil Shah II. It will be captured. This island was under, not the fort, will be captured in 1660 by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. However, the main architect, the one who made it very, very important, is Kanoji Angre, who is basically considered the Shivaji of the sea because he was the admiral of the Maratha Navy, and he will make this the Navy headquarters of the Marathas. Very, very important point you should remember, you should know, because Suvarnadurg fort deserves to be in that list because this became a naval fortified center for the Marathas generally. So it's an island fort, very, very important that way. Take it in, understand it, because these images will help you remember things for the examination. Then we move to the Sindhugarh fort. Sindhugarh fort again is an example of how you create an island fort. To go a little bit closer, you can see what they use is they use the geography of that island. It is very, very hard to come up this way because of the rocks. So they have fortified it equally. On the other hand, they had certain establishments within it so as to make sure that it operates it like a very, very important military center. And at its peak, it could have 10 to 15,000 soldiers inside it. Now, this fortification, the foundation stone will be in 1664. The construction will happen under a very important architect of the Marathas, which is Hiroji Indulkar, and this was made specifically to make sure that the English, Dutch, French and Portuguese presence was undercut by the Marathas. It's a very important point you need to understand, that these forts, and this one specifically, was related to the presence of the Europeans, and this is to make sure that Europeans don't control too much of the Arabian Sea, and therefore the Sindhugarh fort becomes very important in that regard because it is undercutting the advent of Europeans. Then we move further to the coastal fort, which is Vijayadurg. Vijayadurg is coastal. As you can see, it is based on a rocky beach. It is not on the sea. It is on the coast with very, very high walls. They try to make sure that it also becomes extremely difficult to enter from any side, but it overlooks the sea. It overlooks the sea, and it will be under Adil Shah of Bijapur, will be captured in 1653. And the first fortification was actually not even done by the Bijapur rulers. It was the Paramars of this sector, the Rajputs, and it will be developed as a Maratha warship base. So you can see there are 3 islands which they were having, and the Vijayadurg fort could act like a supply chain to these 3 forts. So it's a very, very important fort. You can see the diversity, the technique. These forts still today stand. It shows the level of construction and the material use, that they stand today as they are in the same place where Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj placed them. Then we move to the last, which is the Kandheri. The Kandheri, which is, you have Suvarnadurg, you have Sindhudurg, and the Kandheri Fort, which is basically the last major. This is a much more bigger tourist spot today. It will be in 1679 that the Marathas under leadership of Mayank Bhandari will basically start the fortification. But this is a proper tourist spot today. There's a small lighthouse which has been made, octagonal lighthouse which has been made. But as I showed you, Kandheri, Suvarnadurg and Sindhudurg were the 3 island forts. I hope you have a certain memory for them. And I also showed you Vijayadurg along with Lohagarh. So I've shown you 5, and I hope that you understand what is the physiography and why have they been nominated, and they deserve to be in the list in the same sense in that regard. Then we move to the Panhala Fort. Panhala Fort was under the Bahmanis. Mahmud Gawan used to actually operate from here in the rainy season, and it in 1659 will be taken away by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj from the Bijapur rulers once there will be a little bit of chaos after the death of the general of the Bijapur. Now you can see this is again a very good example of using the topography to create forts in that sense. Then we move to the next one, which is Pratapgarh, a very beautiful fort. Shows a little bit of reminiscence to the Lohagarh fort also, but this controls a very important pass. The Par Pass, which is there in the Sahyadri sector, in the whole Western Ghat sector, the Par Pass is basically controlled by Pratapgarh itself, and Pratapgarh fort in that regard used to be a very important node for the Marathas and specifically for Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Very, very important in that sense. I hope you can understand the importance of it because of the fact that it is based on a pass and therefore strategically located for any movement in this sector. Then the Salhar Fort has a very interesting distinction. If you watch Instagram or if you've been following basic social media, you would have seen certain images in which they show a Maratha fort in which there's a very steep climb. It's a straightforward vertical climb. It is Salhar Fort which they basically show. In the rainy season, it is very difficult to go up and down because of the slipperiness of these rocks itself. But it is so beautifully placed. It is so strategically placed because of the fact that it is one of the highest forts in the Sahyadri range, and it is based on the second highest peak of Maharashtra. After you have the Kalsubai peak, you have the Salhar peak, which is the second highest, and on that you have the fort itself. So Salhar is very, very important for this reason and is very beautifully placed, very, very strategically located in this whole sector at the second highest peak, and it could oversee the whole sector from very far away. If any army was coming from far away, Salhar Fort was the first one to see it because of this. It is based on the second highest peak and is the highest fort in this whole sector. Please remember this important peculiarity. This is where history and geography come together. This is historical geography. History and geography coming together, and certain type of questions can be made in the prelims examination out of this also. Then we move to Shivneri. Shivneri is one of the most famous forts because it is the birthplace of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj himself, and further it is an ancient military fort in which it used to represent a basic palace in that regard, and that is why Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was born here also. Shivneri deserves to be in that list. Very, very important. The birthplace of one of the tallest, the most strategic and the most powerful rulers in India generally. Thereafter, Rajgarh and Raigad are related to each other in the way that Rajgarh has the distinction of having to be that place where Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj stayed the longest for, because Rajgarh Fort was the ruling capital of the Marathas for a very long time. For almost 26 years, Rajgarh Fort was the capital of the Marathas. Again, very strategically located and impregnable from any side because of the using the topography in a certain way. Rajgarh was the first capital, and later Raigad is going to become the capital after Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj will move to that sector. But this fort, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj stayed for the longest, and therefore if you look at it, Raigad is the second capital from where Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj operated. You have Sardar Hiroji Indulkar, who is the one who made that fort also. He's the one who will make this fort also. Very, very important. This much detail not needed, but I'm still giving you a certain visual memory, certain details so that you can remember it in the long run. And then you have, last but not the least, the Tamil Nadu fort, which has its distinction because Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj himself used to call it the most impregnable fort in India, and the British used to call it the Troy of the East because of its fortifications, which is Gingi Fort in Tamil Nadu. This is the odd one out according to the location. Everything else is in Maharashtra. This one is not in Maharashtra. This is in Tamil Nadu. Very important fort generally. Now, I have given you a lot of information in this session. What do you do with it? Because it was very easy for me to say, learn it. See, you need to understand the concept of tangibility and intangibility. Second, you also need to understand how does this work, which is the concept of tentative and representative. Thereafter, you should also know that what is the current affairs, latest current affairs related to it. First one being Shanti Niketan and the Hoysaleshwara temples, and the latest addition or latest nomination is the Maratha Military Landscape. Now, in that, this is immaterial right now. In that, we have three types of questions which can be asked. One, which is location, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu. Second would be center and state, who is taking care of these forts. And last is, what is their type? You have Salhar, Shivneri, Lohagarh, Raigad, Rajgarh and Gingi as hill forts. You have Pratapgarh as a hill forest fort. Then you have the Panhala, which is hill and plateau. Then you have Vijayadurg, which is a coastal fort. And then you have Kandheri, you have Suvarnadurg, Sindhudurg as island forts. Now, if you can remember this much, your job is already done. Other than that, I have tried to give you a certain visual memory of where these forts are, what are their basic distinctions. What is more interesting are the forts on water, the basis of the Maratha naval power, and how they represent a very important architectural addition into our history. Now, with this, you just try to remember first the fort names, then their locations, then their physiographies, and thereafter, why have they been added. And I hope that UNESCO is going to understand the importance of these forts and they become the latest addition and become part of current affairs in that regard. So, with this, I would like to end the session. Tomorrow, we'll talk about Vadnagar, a very important site at which we found at least 5 to 6 stratified layers from different periods, and it has a certain ecological connection with it also. But I hope that this discussion is complete and totally clear to you. Thank you so much. I will see you tomorrow with another set of issues. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.